The story begins and we see two brothers, Pedro and Jimmy, take care of their family's farm in a village. Though their life is tough, it goes on peacefully. One night, the silence of the village is suddenly shattered by the sound of gunfire. Pedro thinks it might be a hunter, but Jimmy realizes that the sound isn't from an ordinary gun. It's a revolver. The brothers become suspicious and decide to go into the forest the next morning. At dawn, they head into the woods with their hunting dog and discover a badly mutilated corpse in a nearby field. Beside the body is a mysterious chest containing many strange items, but among them is a map they can understand. According to the map, the dead man was on his way to an old woman's house in the village. When Pedro and Jimmy reach there, they learn that the woman's son has been suffering from a strange illness for several days. His body is swollen like a balloon, and he is bedridden. The dead man was not an ordinary person. He was a priest referred to in the movie as a cleaner who had been called to solve the problem. There was a belief in the village that some people are chosen by evil spirits and gradually fall under their control, becoming the center of a terrifying curse. Once the curse fully spreads, even people nearby start getting affected. The only way to avoid this evil force was to stay away from it. Pedro and Jimmy inform the police about the incident, but the authorities don't take it seriously. The villagers believe it's just a strange illness, but Rui, the owner of the nearby field, is convinced that this is no ordinary event. A few days ago, their pet dog suddenly became aggressive for no reason, and the very next day, it mysteriously died. Rui suspects that the police are deliberately staying silent about the matter so that people get scared and abandon their homes and farms, allowing the police to seize their land. But Rui was not someone who gave up easily. That night, in anger, Rui took his gun and went to the woman's house, determined to eliminate the evil force. However, the woman pleaded with him, warning that doing so could worsen the situation. As they were arguing, the woman's son suddenly burst into loud laughter and said he would also target Rui's family. Hearing this, Rui trembled with fear. Now he had only two choices: either leave his land and go elsewhere, or seek help. Pedro and Jimmy had already decided to leave the village. They asked Rui to come along, but he wasn't ready to give up his land and the hard work of his entire life. He believed that if the evil force could be removed from the village, others could be kept safe. The three of them came up with a plan to take the cursed person far from the village and bury him in a secret location. They wrapped the body in cloth, placed it in a vehicle, and left the village. But could this really solve the problem? When they had driven hundreds of kilometers, Jimmy asked to stop the car, but Rui insisted they go even farther. While they were arguing, they got distracted and narrowly avoided hitting a child who suddenly appeared on the road. The child shouted something from behind, but the three ignored it and continued their journey. When they had traveled about 500 kilometers, they stopped the car near a deserted riverbank. But as soon as they go to retrieve the body, they find out that it had already fallen from the vehicle. Rui feels relieved upon learning this. At least now it was far from the village. They thought everything would be fine now. But the very next day, strange incidents began to occur. A goat in the field suddenly turned violent and started staring angrily without any reason. When Rui tried to chase it away, it didn't budge. Instead, it moved closer, as if challenging him. Rui picked up a gun and aimed at it, but his wife warned him that this would only anger the spirit even more. Blinded by rage, Rui ignored the warning and pulled the trigger. The goat immediately fell down, but the next moment, something even more horrifying happened. His wife suddenly started attacking Rui and herself with an axe. After this incident, both Pedro and Jimmy became restless. They felt that this curse wasn't going to end so easily. That very night, another incident from the village reached them. A woman's young son suddenly arrived at their house. He said that Rui and his wife had died, and his mother had also gone missing. He was scared and pleaded with Pedro to let him stay the night. Jimmy was afraid to let him inside the house, so he only allowed the boy to spend the night in the warehouse. But then Pedro found a gun with the boy, which they immediately took from him. Before leaving, the boy gave them a warning. Don't turn on the lights at night, because shadows can summon the spirit. The two brothers spent the night searching for a way to escape the curse, and decided that the next morning they would leave the village. But before leaving, they wanted to take their family with them. Jimmy goes to his ex-wife's house to pick up his two sons from his first marriage, while Pedro sets out to pick up his mother. When Pedro reaches his ex-wife's house, he meets Leo, his ex-wife's new husband. Without saying a word, Pedro starts taking off his clothes. He didn't want the shadow of the evil spirit to reach his children. However, his ex-wife becomes angry at this unexpected guest and tells him to leave. Just then, the family dog, after sniffing Pedro's scent, suddenly becomes violent. It grabs their young daughter by her clothes and drags her out of the house. Everyone panics and runs after them, but within moments both the dog and the girl disappear. Frightened by this bizarre incident, Leo runs inside and grabs his gun. Pedro warns him not to use it, but Leo isn't ready to listen to anyone. Pedro quickly runs toward the alley where he last saw the dog and the girl. But when he gets there, he finds only the dog's corpse. It had been shot. The strangest part was that their daughter was nowhere to be found. Pedro rushed back to his ex-wife's house, fearing that the spirit was now targeting his family. But when he got there, he saw his daughter sitting perfectly fine beside her mother. Pedro felt something was wrong. The very next moment, the girl whispered something in her mother's ear. Her mother assumed it was just a child's prank, but Pedro knew this wasn't his daughter. This was someone, or something, else. Terrified, he immediately put both his sons in the car and drove away from there. As soon as they took the car out, Pedro saw a horrifying scene in the car mirror. The girl who was inside suddenly jumped onto the road and began staring at them with a smile. Pedro, Jimmy, and his mother quickly drove out of the village. His mother, who was knowledgeable about such dark powers, told them that there are specific rules to protect oneself from cursed spirits. 1. Never use light. 2. Stay away from animals, because they can see spirits. 3. Do not try to harm the spirit, or it will become even more powerful. 4. Do not touch anything that belongs to the spirit. 5. Never use a gun, as it doesn't weaken the spirit. 6. Avoid saying the name of the cursed spirit. 7. And most importantly, never stand in the shadows, as they can summon the spirit. Hearing these rules made Pedro anxious. He didn't want his children to hear such frightening things, so he asked his mother to stay quiet. But just then, his elder son, who had always spoken very little since childhood, suddenly spoke a name. At that moment, the phone in Pedro's pocket started ringing. His ex-wife's name flashed on the screen. But Pedro knew that wasn't possible. She was no longer alive. With trembling hands, he answered the call and stepped out of the car. On the other end, a strange whisper came through. "Now you cannot escape." Then the call disconnected. In anger, Pedro smashed the phone on the ground. But soon regret filled his heart. He realized that perhaps, because of his mistake, his entire family was now in danger. Suddenly, Jimmy remembered the name of an old friend. Merida, who was once a renowned priest, had subdued many spirits with her husband. But during an attempt to stop a dangerous spirit, her husband died. Since then, she has been living in seclusion, following strict rules to keep herself safe. When they reached Merida and told her the whole story, instead of panicking, she promised to help. But before they could make any plan, something terrifying happened. That very night, strange incidents began occurring in the house. A faint light appeared in a toy kept in Pedro's younger son's room. At the moment the light turned on, shadows formed behind it, and suddenly his mother, who had died some time ago, appeared before him. The boy was sleeping with his grandmother. The grandmother was asleep, but suddenly woke up to a noise and saw Sabrina standing there holding the child in her arms. At first, she didn't find it unusual, but as soon as the woman turned her face, the grandmother screamed. Pedro and Jimmy rushed upstairs, but the scene was even more horrifying. Their ex-wife had jumped off the balcony holding their son. Both brothers ran downstairs in fear, but there was no body. Merida saw bloodstains inside the car and immediately realized that the spirit had now possessed someone else in their family. She looked at Pedro's elder son sitting in the car and then told Jimmy, "He is now completely under the spirit's control. But one thing is holding it back, his different way of thinking." By now, everyone was convinced that this cursed spirit was not going to give up easily. The most important task now was to find that cursed relic and destroy it before the spirit grew more powerful. During this time, Merida shared the most important rule. Don't run from fear, face it instead. Spirits always take advantage of human fear to possess them, but if the mind is strong, they can do nothing. Everyone decided to go in different directions. Mirtha and Pedro took on the responsibility of finding the cursed object, while Jimmy set out to look for Sabrina, who had been taken away under the spirit's influence. Jimmy's mother stayed home to take care of Yair, who was still under the spirit's control. On the way, Mirtha told Pedro her story. She and her husband weren't priests initially. In the movie, the priest is called a cleaner. They were actually frauds who pretended to exorcise spirits just to earn money. They fooled people and faked exorcisms for the show. But one day, they encountered a real spirit so terrifying that had a monk not intervened in time, they both would have died. After that incident, they started learning real black magic and began subduing spirits. But 12 years later, one spirit took revenge and killed Mirtha's husband. Since that day, she had been living in hiding, strictly following the rules needed to avoid spirits. On the other hand, when Jimmy reached the outskirts of the village, he didn't see Sabrina at first, but when he looked carefully, he was shaken to the core. The baby in her hands was no longer alive, and Sabrina, she was chewing on something. The mere thought of what might have made Jimmy's soul tremble. Enraged, Jimmy slammed on the accelerator and rammed his car into Sabrina. His vehicle crashed into a big tree, and everything went silent. Meanwhile, at home, Jair suddenly started behaving normally. He asked his grandmother for food, the same one who had been sitting with him just a while ago. But when grandmother returned with the food, he was sitting alone on the bed, and his eyes had turned completely black. During this time, Pedro and Maritha were busy searching for the cursed Rotan. They searched many places but found nothing. Then they saw an old school building that had now turned into ruins. When they went inside, they saw several children sitting quietly in a classroom. Their eyes were fixed forward, and white lime powder was settled on their feet. Maritha immediately understood that these children were dead. She told Pedro that the spirit was somewhere nearby. Just then, a child came out of the class and pointed in a direction towards something, indicating a location. But as they were about to go there, a girl appeared and said, "That child is lying. The corpse is in my house." Now Pedro was confused. Who was telling the truth? Maritha told him to stay calm because she knew the spirit was only trying to create illusions. Eventually, they felt something strange in one of the classrooms. There were several marks of white lime on the floor. Maritha remembered that lime is a natural preservative that can prevent a corpse from decaying for a long time. Pedro immediately broke a plank of the floor, and underneath it was a corpse. But whose body was it? As Pedro and Maritha began removing more planks, more corpses started appearing. The cursed Rotan they had been looking for was buried at the very bottom. Maritha quickly prepared her cleaning tools because to fully destroy this spirit, it had to be pierced with a special enchanted weapon. But the problem was that the corpse was so heavy that it wasn't easy to pull out, and Pedro had to remove even more of the floor. Just then, the girl suddenly spoke again. She said there was an axe kept in a nearby classroom that they could use to easily cut the corpse. Mirth warned Pedro to be careful, but Pedro believed the girl and headed toward the classroom. However, there was no axe. It was all a trap. The very next moment, the door shut on its own, and Pedro was trapped inside the classroom. Meanwhile, ghostly children attacked Mirth. Their eyes were black, and they pounced on her like vampires. Amidst the screams, they surrounded Mirth and attacked her with a hammer. By the time Pedro broke the window and got inside, Mirth was already covered in blood, and her body was nowhere to be found. Only bloodstains were scattered on the floor. Pedro's small mistake not only cost Mirth her life, but possibly also put his own children's lives in danger. Suddenly, a rotten piece of wood under the floor began to shake, and from it emerged a terrifying figure, the corpse of a child, from whose skull a monstrous sound echoed. Pedro quickly grabbed a tool and struck the figure with all his strength, but it was useless now. The spirit had already fulfilled its intention. Soon after, a blood-soaked child emerged from the corpse. The spirit had now been fully reborn, but this time, it didn't attack Pedro. It simply marked his forehead with blood and then slowly vanished. Following it, all the ghostly children also faded into the darkness. In the end, Pedro and Jimmy somehow survived and returned to their haunted house. Pedro's eldest son reverted to his old self, completely silent, without any reaction. Their mother was nowhere to be found, as if she had never existed. But the strangest thing was the marks on Pedro's forehead. No matter how hard he tried to wash them off, they just wouldn't go away. This wasn't just a story about a spirit. It was a curse that kept passing from one generation to the next like a disease. In his attempt to save his own life, Pedro had unknowingly pushed many people to their deaths. And now, what were the marks on his forehead trying to tell him? Was he the next victim? Perhaps some questions never get answered. With this, the story ends here. If you liked it, subscribe to this channel for more horror stories like this.